I am Lea Esterhuizen, founder and chief exec of a data and insights company called Wider. We use automated calls to workers' mobiles to gather data on living wages and, of course, other working conditions for across sectors and for essentially the same cross-section of stakeholders as represented here, and we do that across the globe. So given this interest in measuring and supporting material improvements in workers' lives, I was very privileged to be invited to moderate this event and to guide you through the program and introduce you to a fantastic lineup of speakers. And so, starting with that fantastic lineup of speakers, it makes a lot of sense to welcome Sander de Jong and Caroline Wildeman. Sander and Caroline have been involved from the outset with the Living Wage Lab, and Caroline Wildeman is program manager of Hivos' Women at Work program, and that focuses on decent work, on achieving decent work for women in Eastern and Southern Africa. And Sander de Jong, welcome, is director of Fairfood, and Fairfood is a Dutch NGO aiming at accelerating change towards a sustainable food system. Welcome both, and thanks for taking time to share the kind of origin story with us. I want to start with the basics. What is the Living Wage Lab? And can you give us an example of how a typical living wage session would work?
Yeah. Shall I start?
Yeah.
Yeah? So you already described it a little bit, but the Living Wage Lab brings together producers, retailers, and stakeholders in the agri-food sector, experimenting with innovative ways of realizing living wages in their supply chains. A typical session, as you already said, brings together around 30, 40, 50 persons for co-creation and experimentation. So it's really like a laboratory, a lab, where new ideas, tools, and methods are being experimented with. And also, lab members bring in their use case or tool to discuss. And obviously, there's enough space for networking and getting to know each other a little bit better.
Brilliant.
Yeah. Yeah, I can add a little bit to that. I think you can see it as a change method, tackling profound issues or wicked problems that are not, where there is no easy answer or not one answer, like living wage. We use the theory U, which means that all the participants can start working on that problem from a different level. So some want to focus more on the research, on knowledge. Others can already experiment, like Sander is saying. That's also where the word lab comes from, experimenting. Others can already start a pilot, to take action. And the commonality is that through the exchange, people learn from each other. So it's a very innovative way to bring about solutions for those issues that are really difficult to tackle. And some examples is exactly that you can see that this step-by-step approach, which makes the big issue a little smaller and address issues in the whole spectrum of the problem. That is why it is a very practical environment. Yeah.
Brilliant, thank you. And why did you two decide to work together on a living wage when you did?
I think we found each other very naturally. Yeah? In the Netherlands, Hivos and Fairfood already knew each other. But at this issue of living wage, we were in the halfway of our campaign for decent work for women in the flour industry in East and Southern Africa. And we learned from our partners that all the issues that they face in their labor conditions are very often how do you say, rooted in the low wages, the low pay. So the women in the flower industry, there are mostly women performing the unskilled and lowest paid jobs, are faced with with all kinds of challenges in the household, no possibilities for their children to send them to school or medical care or housing, all kinds of issues that bring about a lot of stress. But also it makes them very vulnerable for sexual intimidation and harassment, because if you don't know if you get your salary paid the next day, or if the extra hours that you work, you don't know if they get paid, then you are vulnerable. And so at that point in the campaign, I think 5 years ago, we said the wages is the issue to solve, because they are at the backbone of and keeping people in persistent poverty. And I think at Fairfood you were already also working on living wage. Of course, there was already a kind of history, all actors looking into that issue. And I think very naturally we exchanged our experience, and we said the thing that needs to be done right now is to bring actors together to see if we can take concrete steps.
Yeah.
Brilliant. And what has worked well when it comes to using this lab format?
Yeah, so I think what works well is that we're making it very practical, very hands-on. So consider it like a workshop or a lab. It is a place where you can, it's a safe space where you can experiment, but also make failures. And we even stimulate to communicate, to talk about these failures, so we can learn from them. Also, the lab brought to life some great initiatives. For example, Align, an online guidance tool for agri-food companies to start making steps in the field of living wage and living income. And this tool was initiated and co-developed by the lab members. So it is, in that sense, the Living Wage Lab is a perfect platform for also, initiating new ideas and concepts.
Brilliant.
Yeah.
And looking back, what do you two feel have been the greatest achievements of the Living Wage Lab thus far?
There are a number of achievements, I think. I don't know which one you want to mention, but I'm thinking immediately about the large international conference that we have organized. It's exactly 1 year ago. It was initiated by the lab participants, so also together we organized it. We call it Living Wage Lab Extra Large. So instead of 30 people, we had 300 people. It's called The Only Way is Up. So it has a kind of optimistic tone, bringing together a wide range of stakeholders. I think that was a very big achievement. Half of all the participants came from the business sector. All kinds of business, whether it's a retailer, a trader, a producer, they were there. Also representatives from producing countries, civil society organizations, but also a lot of union representatives, all the certification bodies, who am I missing? Researchers,
Everybody was there.
yeah, and also governments. So I think it's also very important that governments take very prominent action. So from the German government, the representatives, and the Dutch government. And so the result was that a lot of actors found each other and gained new knowledge, but also exchanged ideas to continue working on the issue, and made new alliances, and some big commitments were also launched on the bananas, but also coffee, cocoa.
And I think also to add on this, I think one of the bigger achievements is these events, but also that we've facilitated this movement, because it is a community of front runners, enabling to keep and these front runners together keep the topic of living wage at the top of policy making. And I think this movement is bigger than the sum of our two organizations, because the problem is also bigger than all of us. So we're all the owner of the problem, and we're all facing this wicked issue of ending poverty in our food system. And I think together we have this community of creating this enabling environment for fighting it.
Beautiful. So you've mentioned, and I've heard you talk about this before, that you started with a gap, with a lovely community who are enthusiastic and ambitious, but not necessarily, well informed about practical tools and how to go about it.
Yeah.
And you moved from that point to a year ago assembling, a large conference of stakeholders together who were talking about action and collaboration. And I think that in itself, deserves, our acknowledgement of good progress made, good first steps. Finally, I wanted to ask each of you on a more personal level about something. When you look at the future and you look at what you'd like this movement to focus on in the coming 5 years, personally, what are your greatest concerns going forward, and what would you like that focus to be?
Yeah. If I may start. So I think never in history so many men, women and children around the world have been put to work without respecting their basic human rights, because we're talking about living wages and living income, which is a basic human right. So this is still happening, and with the we see a movement and also momentum at a European level towards mandatory human rights due diligence, more legislation, and I think bring it back to the Living Wage Lab. What we want to do for the next years to come is help companies and organizations to continuously improve their practices, their sourcing practices, to follow up on these mandatory frameworks. So I think we will keep on doing the work we're already doing and keep on facilitating this movement, basically.
Thank you, Sander.
To add on that, for me, I think what I find important is that the debate on living wage and living income is held not only here or not in the consuming countries or in the Western world where we develop all this kind of knowledge, but especially in the producing countries where very often the lowest wages are paid and people often even earn $1 a day, so below the poverty line, so very far from the living wage, what we are talking about. And of course that is very complicated. That is not an easy task to do. And we see and we know also from our experience that it sometimes starts already with lobbying the government to set a kind of minimum wage level. What is maybe then not even the living wage, but so for the future, I think it is important that these debates are also held there. And from the labs that we did in the Netherlands, some of the producers took it to the producing countries. So we have established also living wage labs in Uganda and in Malawi. And I hope that these labs will continue and that more will follow, because I think it's really important to have the debate with all the stakeholders that we have here around the table, also in those countries.
Wonderful. Thank you both. That's an excellent kind of foundation for us to understand the Living Wage Lab and why we should be celebrating it today.